Welcome to part 3 of my analysis of the Paltry Nude sets starts on a spring voyage, the third video, and probably will be a 5-part video series. We talked about the first 2 stanzas so far, so by way of recap, the Paltry Nude exists in present tense language. She is presented in the language of direct experience and immanence. This communicates that the Paltry Nude is of the world and is a person. She is subject to emotions, to moods. She will turn against that which she is tired of. She will turn towards that which beckons, that which interests her. Meanwhile, she accompanies the artistic preparation of materials. That is, as we said, the weed as being first found, although the foundness of it is absurd. You can't simply find a weed amidst a mass of weeds. There is a selection of a weed, and more likely there is an abstraction of a single weed, in the same way that there was an abstraction of a wave. A wave cannot exist apart from waves. Therefore, it's very much a matter of the mind. It's in its imaginative capacities. So it appears that there's a full psychology happening around the Paltry Nude, ascribed to the Paltry Nude. She lives in the world. She's subject to moods and other such driving forces. But also there's a level of abstraction, and also there's a further level of the selection of elements that will go into a creation, and also into an arrangement in a space that perhaps corresponds to the artistic, the ultimate artistic composition, in the same way that purple stuff is arranged around the arms, that interiors suggest interiors that are filled with items that are ordered, and bespeak, again, artistic creation. We move on in the third stanza. Let me read it. The wind speeds her on, blowing on upon her hands and watery back. She touches the clouds where she goes, in the circle of her traverse of the sea. Well, first, we don't have a reference to Zephyr, just to the wind. We already had if we are speaking about Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, the wind is not separate from the figure of Zephyr, and it's the mythological explanation of where wind comes from. We have the wind. So at least in the context of the stanza, we have a meteorological phenomenon. Blowing upon her hands and watery back. We also then have an orientation. The wind is behind her. Well, of course, the wind was, although it's kind of hard to see in Botticelli's version, it's kind of to the side of her, but at least there's an implied behindness, even though clearly this is not, Botticelli was not intent on capturing the full reality, the full dimensionality that obtains when a force is working upon an object. Whereas here, we are removed from a mythological setting, and we just have the wind blowing. So here we can assume that it is fully behind her, blowing upon her hands and watery back. Well, let's talk about the hands. Well, unlike in Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, the hands would have to be out, much raised as a sail would be, perhaps to the sides or overhead, somewhere outward, or they could not possibly catch the wind. Now, obviously, there's still something, we're still very much in imagination, because you you cannot propel a figure simply by the hands. There simply isn't enough surface area to capture that pressure and to transform it into the speeding of the figure. However, here we're somewhere in between the mythological and let's call it the naturalistic. So the hands at least suggest a reality that in order to propel her, there would have to be a surface that would have to catch the wind. And there are two surfaces, the hands as well as the watery back. Now, the hands are unlike. Remember, we keep going back to the fact that the Paltry Nude is almost diametrically opposed to Botticelli's Venus. Botticelli's Venus, of course, is arriving, whereas the Paltry Nude is setting out to sea. And here, the hands have to be out, but again, if we look at the Paltry Nude, or rather at Venus, her hands are drawn inward. They are a part of an approach to conceal her genitals, and therefore to create at least the drive, or what we call the will to modesty. Now we know that she'll only be fully modest when she's encloaked in that pink garment, and then she's brought into the culture and presented in a culturally appropriate way. But clearly, it's while not spelling it out, the logic, again, logic is coming into this. The logic is that her hands have to be disposed differently, radically differently than in the birth of Venus. Now, additionally, so at least to the eye in the sea, which is not a human eye, it's nature. She is fully exposed because her hands are outward. Now, of course, that doesn't violate modesty because there's not a human out there. There's a passing ship, perhaps. But absent that occurrence, her exposure is still not apparent to the land. Secondly, she has a watery back. So, of course, it's blowing upon, makes sense, her hands and her back, but it's a watery back. Now, at first we might think, well, in that way, she is a wave. Again, as I said previously, there's no experience of a wave, not generally speaking. What went through my mind, if you are surfing, a surfer could experience a wave underneath. But still, that wave is only a wave in language, if I'm conveying it, because it cannot be separated from the whole series of waves. It can't be really extricated from the overall force of wind on water that we call the sea. Additionally, we can't really call her a wave because her hands are distinct from it. Now, perhaps in the course of it, we would say, well, her hands are out, but then she has a watery back, and then perhaps she resolves and she's completely a wave. However, as we go a little bit further, we get another perspective from this. And again, it's all about perspective changing. And so therefore, we're getting into a naturalistic account of nature. That's contradictory. Let's call it a naturalistic, that is, we look for explanations from the materials, the forces around us, as opposed to abstracted mythological figures that are either directing forces against dead matter, purely objective matter, or the matter that we observe is actually continuous with the mythological agency, in the way that perhaps a river or the ocean itself might be considered gods or titans. Let me read the next sentence. She touches the clouds where she goes in the circle of her traverse of the sea. Well, it says that she touches the clouds, so not only are her hands away from her body, her hands, well, how can this be? She's touching the clouds. Well, maybe from her perspective she's touching it, but if we're watching her, there's going to be her hands, and then there's going to be clouds above her. Let's say that there are indeed clouds that have something of a discrete existence. They have something like boundaries, that there's the sky and then this cloud and clouds, and she's touching them. But if she's doing that, then she must be a giant. But there's no evidence that she's a giant. The only way that this could possibly appear to an observer from behind her is that she is at the horizon. And the clouds are so close to the sea where she would be that it would appear that she's touching the clouds. Now, moreover, this gives a different interpretation of a watery back. Not only is she at the horizon, she has gone partially over the edge of the horizon. So if this is our line of sight, we're going to see her hands, but the bottom of her is going to be obscured, and it'll appear to be a watery back. Now, all of this is comprehensible only to a semi-modern or modern mind, a mind that understands that the Earth is actually, and as we say, an oblate spheroid. It's a sphere. This is something that the ancients, where these myths originated, didn't appreciate. The Earth was flat, or the ocean was a river going around the world. Certainly nothing like this. This is what I call the naturalistic. It's let's call it either a scientific or a pre-scientific. It's on the cusp of science, and we only are doing this once. We have moved out of a mythological understanding, which we generally place the advent of in maybe the 5th century or the 6th century BC with the pre-Socratic philosophers who came after the myths that would have animated, let's say, the Iliad and the Odyssey. So this is an interesting break with the very subject matter of the Venus. This is a non-mythological character, this Nude, apparently. And so clearly this voyage is taking us out of the realm of mythology into science, into, as I said, a modern understanding. Now, this suggests maybe a clarity that's bordering on the mathematical. We actually could provide angles and other mathematical expressions, a topology of this in order to explain what it is that we're seeing. But right immediately as this is said, we get into ambiguity again, because she doesn't touch the sky. She touches the clouds, and as I think that I said, clouds at their best, at their most, when they have a particular identifiable shape or something kind of a regular shape, are amorphous. They don't have strict boundaries to them. Now, obviously in science, when you get into discussion of orbitals and of the atom itself, we talk about probabilistic structures that don't have boundaries. In an orbital, we talk about the orbital as being a probability of finding an electron as opposed to having located the electron. So here we've touched upon the whole notion of ambiguity or uncertainty in our measurements. Okay, so that goes. And then the very use in English, the word where is ambiguous. Now, in other languages, or even earlier in English, you had several words for where. You say from whence it comes, whither we go, but we can't use whither here because it's like a flashing light, meaning that we have an archaic term being used. Where here is ambiguous because, well, let's see, She touches the clouds where? Well, that seems to correspond to one meaning of where, which is the locational where something is. But then it says where she goes. So that's in the sense of whither. Now, what we see in this poem are expectations that are regularly undermined or upset. So first I'm moving along. She touches the clouds. Where she goes. Where the clouds are, but then the clouds are not, in that sense, where she is. However, if we imagine this again by watching her, both of these senses can be true. We can look at her and we can say where she goes, because that is where she's going. But at the same time, where is where the clouds are. So it's both a closing of a distance as well as a location. So again, we're trying to create a sense of, well, or put it this way, we've moved from exactness to a range, that we're somewhere between here and there. Now, something else to consider is the very present tense. Up till now, the present tense has been used to suggest the now, experience of this present moment. You can use the present simple in this way. However, here she touches the clouds where she goes. Now, touches can be used to convey what I'm doing at this moment. I can say I'm touching, or she is touching, or she touches. Again, you can use either one. They're not perfectly interchangeable, but you can use either one. Goes is problematic here for the reason that if I want to say that this is what she's doing now, I really need to say where she's going at this moment. When I say where she goes, that's generally in I guess we could call it in a frequentive sense. If I say where she goes on a regular basis. But now this is a departure from the established pattern of usage. We're going from the present simple as conveying what I'm doing now to what I do regularly or habitually. And this makes particular sense in this last sentence of the stanza, in the circle of her traverse of the sea. This sounds like a regular feature. A circle is repetitive. If I talk about that I travel in a circle, well, I've also conveyed a certain kind of travel. We know that the Venus in The Birth of Venus, although it's in the backstory, she went across. She started out in the ocean and went across until she reached Cyprus. Here, she travels in a circle. Circling means starting from a point and returning to that point. In this way, we are coming into the way of the seasons, what the seasons do on a regular basis. If I ask, how does time go? Time goes in a circle. We wouldn't say time is going in a circle. It's not, because that's not true. We don't speak about time in this sense. We talk about what time regularly does, because when we talk about time going, we are on the level of discussing patterns. So we've made a transition, again, by upsetting expectation from the present tense in a present moment, communicating present activity, to something that is habitual. And that enters the circle, that corresponds nicely to the idea of a circle. In addition, a circle is abstract. So in this sense, we've moved from a moment, we've taken an analysis, or at least a recording of our present observations. It's as though in science when we say that we record our observations, what is happening now, and then we generalize. We talk about a pattern here. And here is the pattern. It is moving in a circle. So we've moved from a particular, maybe we've gone as far as an attention to the particular can get us, and we have to move into the circle. The circle is an abstraction. A circle is, as we know, a circle is perfect, and so a circle really can't exist in the world. It's a pattern, it's idealized, and it simply consists of data points that we arrange, we idealize into a certain pattern, from which we imagine maybe there are no deviations. We talk about a classical science. We establish principles, but we exclude talking about any sort of deviations. And even this word traverse also is a distance from the Venus who moves across. A traverse is a moving without the sense of destination and source. A traverse is a following of a track. In a following of a track, we might be a planet orbiting the sun. The sun, of course, I could say the Earth is going around the sun, but we generally say the Earth goes around the sun because it is a pattern. We don't experience the going around of the Earth. It's impossible to do that. But when we gather all of our sense information, all of our data, we can then draw a conclusion from it which says that we are indeed traversing a path about something. Also, the sea is repeated. The sea is still not understood. There's a kind of a repetition here. The high interiors of the sea, the traverse of the sea. Well, what is the sea? Is the sea worth of note? Is it just there? Or is it something outside of my experience that I never really experience? A circle delimits. It makes the world manageable, or at least an experience of the world manageable, when the world itself is anything but manageable. We're exposed in the world, and the world is dangerous to us, although we do our best through science to make it as safe and approachable as possible, to our peril. Hopefully that wasn't too rambly, but I think I'll leave it at that for the third video, and I'll pick up my thought in video number 4.